The Experiential Edge, the show about learning by doing in higher education, with your host, Trevor Finch.
Welcome to The Experiential Edge, the podcast for post-secondary instructors looking for ideas, answers, roadmaps to building better learning environments. I'm your host, Trevor Finch, and I'm a former instructor. But you know what? I realized when I was an instructor, especially when I first got in, I realized time, right? I was always under a time crunch. Now, that's just me personally. Hey, I know that's part of me. I'm not going to call myself a super organized person. But I did realize that there's a lot to teaching, right, in terms of the different pieces and what we have to do. And when I started the first time over, I thought, oh, this is going to get better. But then I realized it doesn't always get better because you're getting new courses. You've never done this before. You're teaching with instructors that you've never taught before. You're teaching subjects that perhaps you're not the expert in, but they need a body in the classroom. So time poverty is one of the most consistent realities I think instructors are facing right now, even more than ever. I think part of it is, there's more students, there's more admin, there's a lot more reporting, and there's not as many hours for support. Something always gives. At its worst, time pressure turns into teaching in survival mode, right? So you're reusing content, you're giving less feedback, you're having less of those meaningful learning moments. And that's where experiential learning comes in and why today's conversation really matters. And so today's guest is Kim Donaldson, a business professor at Cabring College. Now, she and my colleagues have worked together at Praxair for quite a few years, and we've got to know each other a little bit. And I would describe you, Kim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, as a lifelong finder of time hacks.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm nodding my head along with you when you're talking about the fact that time is something that none of us have enough of, and it seems to be slipping through our fingers very quickly.
Isn't that the truth? Do you think you come by this naturally, or is this something that kind of evolved over time that you're like, hey, I got to figure out how to do this faster, better, or whatever else?
Well, you said survival mode, and I think that is, oh my goodness, you couldn't have described it better. When I first started teaching, which feels like about 1,000,000 years ago, I was given a piece of chalk, a timetable, and pointed towards my classroom and said, good luck, do this. So, learning a lot of this stuff happened on the fly, and then technology was introduced, and it was meant to save time for us and help us to better, to better manage our time, where I think that technology itself sometimes takes a little bit more away from us because of the instant access and the always on factor. So how did I figure this stuff out? Because I had to.
Now, obviously, the first resource, and we're often told this, talk to other people who have done the same course. Talk to, some of us will just use, good old Google. But that, for different people, there's different things, right? So for different learning styles, just like with our students, there's different learning styles for ourselves and also how we input and output information. For you personally, just to set the stage here, I guess we'll start with when you say you're a time saver, right? And how could I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I apologize. What makes you an expert in this? Besides me saying you're an expert, how do you quantify the time that you've saved? Just overall, I want people to know that I'm talking to an expert, and I truly believe it.
So how do I quantify the time that I save? Again, talking about that survival mode, right? I went from teaching, let's say 3 courses in a semester to teaching 5 with upwards of 45 to 50 students, all with different learning styles, many with different accommodations. I had to learn how to do this, and I've been doing it now for over 20 years. So, I think
practice makes perfect.
Yeah, they say it takes 10,000 hours to become a master at something. I feel like even just this week I've put in 10,000 hours.
But you're not, because you've got all these time hacks. So
yes,
if you look back to how you did things originally compared to now, vastly different, correct? And that's like all of us, we evolve.
Vastly different.
So when you've gone into looking at these time-saving hacks and different things, what are you looking for? When you say, when do you know this is an area I can save time on? This is something, like, how do you start your process? Just give us for those of us that are thirsting for the opportunity to save some time, what would that be?
Well, I have to thank you for making me really think about this and for making me analyze this. So in the course of preparing for this podcast, I realized that I'm looking for time-saving hacks in essentially 3 different areas or 3 basic categories: preparation, grading, and feedback, because those are the 3 they're the biggest components of a teaching profession. The time that you're in front of the students is minimal compared to everything that happens in the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any one of those 3 that you find more important than others, or are they all important, or does it depend on the course and the material?
I mean, it can depend on the course, but if I had to prioritize them, I would prioritize them as preparation first, feedback second, grading third. So I'll give you an example. When I'm looking for time-saving hacks in preparation, what I'm looking for are tools or practices that reduce student confusion before it happens. I find every single unclear instruction becomes some sort of email that I have to answer or a comment that I have to include when I'm grading later.
Yeah.
You know yourself, having been in the classroom, and I'm sure that everybody listening can relate to this. We've got many different students with many different learning styles, and we know that they process information in 100 different ways. So the more variety that I can provide when giving students instructions, I find it's the better. So when I'm framing my assignments, I always try to provide things like step-by-step guides,
Yeah.
examples, rubrics, checklists for students to follow.
So let's just frame this to give some examples. So what would you give some examples of some really specific tactics that you've used that have really saved you some time? If you had to pick a top three or however you want to do it, what would you say they are?
Well, I think first it's the information that I put into my assignments. So embedded in my assignments, and then of course, depending on the course or the requirements, along with including a what to do part, I also include a what not to do or a where
Okay.
not to focus section. What this does is it helps students to save time as well, and it helps me to save time when I'm grading because it streamlines student thoughts and approaches. Now, I know that there's probably some people that are watching or listening right now that would say, well, students don't read everything. And you're right, they don't. But I find that that extra work on the front end saves me a ton of time on the back end. And especially during bottlenecks that are, we always run into when grading assessments inevitably collides with preparation for the upcoming semester. Another thing that I look for, another hack that I do is I'm always looking for systems that help me to update the materials that I have instead of recreate. So what I'll do is I'll start by creating master slide decks where I can revise or update content instead of continuously reinventing the wheel. And I've got a pattern that I follow. So my master slide decks they follow this sort of process. What is this? What does it mean? How is it used? Why is it important? And here's an example. And then the
Gotcha.
concepts generally remain the same, especially if it's a theory course, but it allows me to update the examples to really fresh and timely content that students can then relate to.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And I know I want to just put some context in this. I used to get master slides,
Mhm.
right? Because sometimes you have course leads,
Mhm.
or I would even have my own. And then you put it away. Then you teach another term, then you have a break, whatever else it is, and then you come back, and then you're looking at this master deck, and you're like, what the heck was I doing? Why was I doing this one? Now, the people who are hyper organized in that's they already have their systems. But for people like me, I would literally go back and look at this thing like, what the heck did I do? And I would look at it like, man, this is a lot of work to reinvent this or to update it. And when you're updating, are there any things that you do specifically that can make it a little quicker? Are there areas or notes or things you give to yourself? I don't know. I didn't. I'm not that person, but maybe you are.
Well, in my master slide decks, I use Google Slides or I use PowerPoint, depending on, I've used Canva before as well.
Yep.
But what I'll do is in those notes sections, those are my saving grace because those are always point form, key things that I have to hit in the presentation. Sometimes I'll introduce a little bit of an introduction for myself or,
Yes.
the takeaways that students have to have. And I find, again, the process that I use where I follow that formula of what is this? What does it mean? Why is it important? Here's an example. Generally, all I really have to do is if I've prepared myself well enough in the front end, all I have to do is change the example to something that's recently happened.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now we're talking process, and that's important. And I know that, right? Everyone knows that. But process often takes discipline. It also takes time. It takes practice, so on and so forth. When you start moving outside of that, right? Because that is important. And we've already talked a little bit about some of those practices, going back, reviewing, reflecting. And I know I'm thinking myself when I was instructor going, oh yeah, I know that. But what do I do when I'm in the crunch, right? When we've talked before and when I know about you, you look for tools, right? You look for things that can help you. What are some of the tools that you found that have been really helpful to save your time?
So let's talk a little bit about feedback for a second. So when we talk about feedback, I mean, of course, electronic feedback is fantastic, right? But a lot of times that is, again, time consuming. So let's talk about feedback. Feedback is, of course, the most important gift that we can give to a learner. And I'm always really, really aware of the fact that as a professor, my feedback may not be as valuable as the feedback from a peer. So
Yeah.
while I do provide some written or electronic feedback to students, in my courses, I find that the offline part of this works a lot better. And I use a lot of peer troubleshooting techniques or group feedback approaches. So
Yeah.
in Proxar, for example, when engaging in the simulation, we have weekly discussions where students will volunteer to have their decisions analyzed by the entire group. So we go over performance KPIs, specifically the diagnosis and consistency reports, to try to determine what went wrong and why did it happen and what can we do to fix it. So
Yeah.
I find that involving the entire student group is really beneficial because it allows students to troubleshoot their own performances in the process. And this saves me countless hours of responding to individual emails or requests for
Yes.
meetings. And it fosters an environment of collaboration and student-led learning. And it's been one of my favorite parts of teaching with the Proxar simulation since I began, because I find that students who engage, they leave with a really solid understanding of the cause and effects of their decisions, so much so that grading is rarely questioned or refuted because they clearly understand where they went wrong. So in that saves me the tools or the time as well.
And are they less likely to question or challenge, we'll use the formal term, peer-led feedback versus instructor-led, do you find? Do you like when you talk about that engaged, and obviously it's a facilitated process. You don't just let them go out in the wild and go crazy and it's like Lord of the Flies, but you facilitate that in class and get that feedback through them. Does that process, do you think that reduces that challenging?
And it also opens up more pathways for better collaboration and cooperation among the students. So I find that what they'll do is, after a few conversations, excuse me, there always seems to be someone in the class or in the group that understands or has a better grasp of understanding of the simulation than others. And so then
Yes.
what students will do is that opens up those lines of communication for them to then speak with their peers. And if they disagree about something or they feel that perhaps the feedback from the peers is not valuable, then both students come to me and say, all right, who's right? Or, how do we approach this situation? Because this is what I think and here's why. And this is what they think and here's why. What do you think? And it's a really cool experience. It's one of my favorite parts of the Proxar simulation experience.
Do you ever sit back when you go through these processes, and whether it's with the Proxar simulation or others, I assume you use these kind of active peer-led feedback loops frequently. Do you ever sit back and there's an observation that comes out from a student? Do you go, "Oh, I never even thought of that," or like, are they teaching you in that moment?
All the time. All the time. I started playing the Proxar simulation with them because I was finding that they were coming up with those moments much more than I was comfortable with. To avoid the risk of looking like I didn't know what I was talking about, I decided to play against them. And I found that it enriched the entire experience for all of us.
Well, and to quote Star Wars, the students become the master. Sorry, I'm a geek. Yeah, but it's true. And I've gone through the same thing where it's kind of that cool moment where you sit there and go, wow, my students are getting it. Okay, that's the moment we all look for. And in today's world, especially with, these generations are quieter. They don't talk as much. The cohorts are very different. A lot of online classes, cameras, they prefer to chat versus saying anything. When you can get that legitimate feedback, but more importantly, get that legitimate moment where you can say, okay, they get it, right? That's valuable. But also, we're all teachers, right? We're all instructors, but we're also learners. And if you didn't have a joy of learning or a quest or a curiosity, right? If you didn't have that naturally, you wouldn't, this profession would never, you would never lead to it and stay in it. The cool part is when you can learn something as well as when you're teaching, I just feel like that gives me the warm fuzzies,
Oh,
right? When I used to have
absolutely.
those moments. And that's what you're leading through with this. So it's not just about saving some time, but it's also the authenticity. Is that a good word?
Absolutely. And then going back to the time saving thing, I want you to just consider for a minute, the different levels and the multiple decisions that happen in a Proxar environment. And it's never ever one decision that leads to the results. It's always a series of decisions. So I want
Yeah.
you to imagine the time that it would take to put all of that into an email or to put all of that into a feedback. Now, here, consider this and look at this, and here's your decision, and here's how it happened. That is just so much better facilitated through the conversations and in
Yes.
the classroom environment. So it encourages students to attend, it encourages them to engage, it encourages them to insightfully look at their own results and draw conclusions from there. It's just an excellent time-saving tool, but it's a better teaching and learning tool as well.
Yeah. And that's really what it is. Like teaching grade, like all the grading, the feedback, it's all elements of what our job is, right?
Mhm.
Is to teach and to pass down knowledge. Now we've talked about, I know we're going to talk about other ones, but we have talked about and obviously for anyone who hasn't figured it out, I work for Praxar. Kim uses our products. That's the connection. We love it. And time hacks. We had mentioned, obviously, you're using your own techniques around the simulation. The reason why you're using simulation is because it is very complex. It's a group environment. It's very dynamic. It's competitive. But built within that, you've taken advantage. You're probably the one person that I've come across, I've talked to, who has really taken advantage of a built-in tool, which a lot of technological tools and even LMS systems have, but I don't think everyone uses to their full extent. Maybe you can share a little bit about how you found the grading tool, but then how did you maximize it? Maybe you can just share a little bit of that.
Well, this is going to blow your mind. Okay. So honestly,
Ready? I'm ready.
this was a game changer. Okay. So when I'm grading, I'm always looking for methods of automation that will handle the mechanics of the grading process, but not the thinking part of this. So that is the auto grading tool like the one that Praxar provides. So this Praxar grading tool was a godsend for me because I used to spend hours entering data into spreadsheets to calculate the weighting of each of the KPIs used in the grading the student's performance in the simulation. And most of the time, what I would have to do, because the data didn't show up in the same way that my student grading sheets did, all that stuff would have to be entered manually because the information wouldn't transfer. So this was hours of data entry and double checking the data to make sure that the results were copied over correctly. Now, to put this in perspective, I generally have an enrollment of about 40 to 45 students per semester in my course, and my students don't play in teams. Each student plays a solo version of the simulation. So you
Right.
can
So you got
imagine,
45 individual companies with individual results. Are all different. You can't just cut and paste or
yep. And very
migrate.
often,
Yeah.
I'm teaching more than one section. So there was one semester where I was teaching 3 sections. So that was a ridiculous amount of students and a ridiculous amount of grading. So at
And
the
this is
end,
all on you, right? Because
it
it's
was
not like some people are in universities, they've got TAs, got whatever else. This is all on your time.
there's no such thing as a TA in the college that I
Yeah.
teach in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at the end of the semester, I could expect to spend an entire half day just entering data and double checking my entries and performing calculations to enter the grades for the simulation before that tight grading deadline. And now that came at the same time that I was grading final exams or projects in the 4 other courses I was
Yeah.
teaching that semester, right? So now with this grading tool, I can set up the grading parameters at the beginning of the semester. I don't have to worry about anything until the very end. I simply run my report, upload the grades to our college's grading tool, and I'm done.
Yep.
So I went from 5 to 6 hours of work per section to less than 30 minutes. And that was
Oh my,
a game changer for me.
that's
This is
wild.
why I'm so excited about this.
I know. I know. And this is not an advertisement
No,
for our grading tool. It's an example. Now, that said, I do agree with it as well. That is wonderful. But some people are not comfortable with it. They don't trust them. They don't want whatever. Did you ever verify it? Did you go, were you skeptical at all? Or were you just like, nope, this is great. Let's just go.
So, truth be told, the first few semesters that I did use it, I just trusted it and went through. Then I found that as I was going through it, there were a few little tweaks that I could make. I could adjust some of the values, and there
Yeah.
were, some things where I thought they were more important than others, like some KPIs I placed more weight on. And then through the experience, and after I started playing with the students, I realized maybe I needed to reconfigure it a little bit. It also really helped me to understand participation that has to be included as part of the assessment
Yes.
because the participation is directly tied to the comprehension, which is directly tied to the results. So all of these things, like you said, Trevor, every semester it's a learning experience. I learn from the students and their experiences, and then I learn from my own as well. So I'm always making little tweaks. But not one of the tweaks that I've ever made has done anything but save me time.
Exactly. And it's like anything else, practice makes perfect, right? So the more you use it, the better it gets. Just like we teach our students, right? That's scaffolding. Other time savers, like you said, Praxer is one example. We don't want to just limit to that. What are some other things that you've found, like in terms of specific tools? Have there been other ones that you found, whether, ways to organize a calendar, way to organize, like anything like that?
To be honest with you, try to just do sort of old school organization and preparation. I mean, yeah, using calendars to make sure that I'm keeping track of my grading, reminders, like sticky notes to do a checklist for myself of things that I have to do. But it really does come down to three major categories for me. Again, it's preparation, feedback, and grading.
I wanted to ask you this earlier. You do it in that order specifically, right?
I do.
And why are they in that order instead? Because often that's an order of, because when we do our assessments and we go through, we prep for them, we give all the information, we go through the whole process, then we give the grade, and with the grade along grade comes feedback.
Mhm.
Why do you? So that's kind of the progression, right? And that's usually how the when you're entering grades in an LMS, that's the pretty much the order. Here's different grades. Here's your feedback at the bottom. Why do you reverse it?
I flip it around because I find that I enjoy facilitating a more student-led experience. And in that student-led experience, the feedback comes before the grades because it's always experiential. That's why we're here, right? So
Exactly.
on the preparation side, I'm always focusing really heavily on reducing student confusion up front. That's really
Yes.
important. I'll use systems that allow me to update rather than create. So those master slide decks are so important for me. And then the stable, predictable patterns that I use, students really respond well to it. So that
Yeah.
allows me to just keep that same process and then swap in those fresh and relevant examples. For the feedback, again, I lean really heavily on peer and group based approaches.
Yeah.
So we work through the data together and try to figure out what went wrong. And then that shifts feedback from one to one to many to many. It
Yes.
saves countless hours of emails and meetings and builds student ownership of the learning. So grading is the last part of this process. And I think that as professors, we can all understand that the time that we are provided to grade has been greatly reduced over the years. So going from maybe 20 minutes to be able to grade a student's project to now on average less than 6 minutes. So grading has to become the final part of this. And quite honestly, that should be the easiest part of it if those other two pieces are in place first.
Absolutely. And I know I made this mistake once. I was under a time crunch and I was way behind on one particular assignment, thinking I was the only instructor in the entire world that would ever be not give feedback for like almost a month on a major assignment, when I realized it happens everywhere afterwards. But that doesn't condone. I felt just stressed. So I went through and I graded with very little feedback. And my gosh, the students, a lot of them got good grades and they did great work. But they came back to me. I had several of them challenged. They kind of went, "Well, what's going on? I want to know why is this so good?" And I didn't think. I actually had students come to me and say, "I thought I did worse than this. Why did you give me that good of a grade?" And then finally, I had a student said, "Look, I'd rather have the feedback than the grade." And to me, that was an aha moment. Like, we're talking about time hacks, but it's not time hack to save time so you can go like have a longer coffee. It's so that you can improve the learning experience, correct?
Yep.
So when you think of, if you could just tell me a little bit, when you think of it in that framing, in that sense, what impact has all these time saving measures that you've done had on your own teaching experience?
It's had a huge impact. And again, I have to thank you for inviting me to do this. It really made me stop and think about what I do and how I do it. So, what I found was the most effective time saving strategies don't make you work faster. They just prevent unnecessary work from being created in the first place.
Yeah.
So, if you create intentional, front loaded, smart systems, it results in designing courses that scale well. So you've
Right.
got clarity and structure, and then student ownership, and all of those do the heavy lifting so that your effort goes into meaningful teaching and not preventable cleanup.
Totally. So this leads us to the last piece we want to talk about, which is the ultimate takeaway. So what if you could sum up or say to one person, here's how you can do this right now, how you can replicate some of my time hacks in a classroom right now, what would you say that is?
So I would say number one, preparation. is key. So make sure that clarity is the first thing that you are providing to students. If they can clearly understand what your expectations are and what the outcomes should be, then they will always rise to the occasion. It saves you tons and tons of time. Don't cut corners. And Trevor, I think you made the comment of the day where you were saying that it's the feedback that's the most valuable to students. Grades are a dog whistle. Right. And so when students get A's, very rarely those students, they say they care about the grade, but what they really care about is the fact that they've proven that they can understand and that they can apply those concepts. So I think the most value comes from the feedback. If you're going to spend extra time somewhere, make sure it's there.
That's awesome. I love it. Now, you've got an idea, right? You've got something that a little takeaway, like literally, that we can share with people, they can download. Can you just briefly sketch out what the idea is, and then we can tell our listeners how to get a hold of it?
So yeah, that was just essentially the system that I was talking about, where you're structuring your courses, you're structuring your assignments in a really predictable manner. The one that I use is where I talk about, where I teach students those learning patterns. So when I'm teaching a concept, what is it? What does it mean? How is it used? Why does it matter? And I find that even when I'm approaching preparation, whether it's for a course I've taught before or a course I've never taught before, if I follow that pattern, it saves me a ton of time from spinning in circles, trying to figure out how do I approach this learning content where I know I've got that formula that works and that students respond well to.
That's awesome. At the end of the day, you still have to have a framework and a process. So you've given us a window into that, and we are going to have something that people can download. I just want to wrap up saying that I really appreciate the time that you spent today. Since we're talking about time, you've dedicated some of your valuable time. I really appreciate the emphasis on preparation, but also I think leaving that time for feedback is so critical, and you really emphasized, and I really appreciate that. So I want to thank you for coming today, Kim. You know what? All I got to say is, I hope this was worth your time. And if any kind of feedback, we would love to hear from you. And that's it for today. Stay on the edge, people.
You've been listening to the Experiential Edge. For more tips, tricks, and ideas from this episode, go to experientialedgepod.com.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.